Welcome back. This is LTC02 in our long-term care predictability series. Today, we're going to reduce one of the biggest causes in redesign in long-term care projects, compliance surprises that show up late. I'm going to show you a one-page tool we use called the Regulatory Map, so you can see the licensure constraints, the life safety constraints, and survey expectations early before you lock a layout direction. So let's talk about who this is for. This is for operators, administrators, directors of nursing, facilities teams, owners, and development partners. Anyone who has to live with the consequences of late rework. The stakes here are real. Redesign drives schedule slip, budget growth, and operational disruption. And in long-term care, it can also drive survey exposure because the environment ends up not supporting the way care is actually delivered. Here's the pattern that we see over and over. A layout gains momentum. People start reacting to drawings, and then compliance reality appears, sometimes from licensure and sometimes from life safety and sometimes from what surveyors actually expect in practice. And then the project redesigns. The important part is that redesign is rarely contained. A wall move becomes a door and a hardware change, and that becomes a life safety change. That becomes MEP changes, and if you're in a renovation, it becomes a phasing problem. The point today is to move those discoveries earlier where they're still cheap. The biggest source of confusion is that people treat regulations like one thing. In reality, it's a stack of 3 layers. Layer 1 is licensure, what you're allowed to operate, the program type, the capacity, the services, the staffing implications, and sometimes environmental requirements that are tied to that license. Layer 2 is building and life safety. How the building has to perform in an emergency, how egress works, fire and smoke protection concepts, and the code pathway, the authority having jurisdiction, so the city or the municipality that's issuing the permit, expects. Layer 3 is survey expectations. So what gets evaluated in practice, where policy and environment must align. If you mix up these layers, you get late surprises. Now, I want to say this plainly. Code compliance is not the same as survey readiness. A building can pass inspections and still create operational conditions that increase risk. Survey outcomes are influenced by what staff actually have to do under real conditions during peak moments, during admissions, during staffing variability, not just whether the building checks boxes. So here's the tool. It's a one-page regulatory map. The goal is not to turn you into a code expert. The goal is to map the stack, surface early confirmations that drive layout, and keep a watch list of rework triggers before you approve schematic direction. A quick note, regulations vary by jurisdiction and program. This isn't legal advice. This is a decision tool to make sure the right questions get answered early with the right authorities and stakeholders. So step 1 is context, because context changes the answers. New build, renovation, or additions are different universes. Occupied or vacant construction changes everything. Your resident risk profile matters. Memory care and behavioral health safety concerns introduce different tensions than lower risk populations. And infection control tolerance matters, especially in renovations. If you don't lock context first, you'll argue about rules without agreeing on what the project actually is. So step 2 is filling the stack on one page. For licensure, write down what you believe you are licensed to operate. Capacity, the services, the special unit types, and note the items that influence layout. For building and life safety, list your authority having jurisdiction, your building, your fire, your health codes, your health departments, and capture the code pathway assumptions that affect layout direction. And for survey expectations, write down the practice areas that get high attention for your program and what environmental conditions must support those practices. This is where you stop treating compliance as an afterthought and start treating it as a project driver. Now we get into the highest value section of the tool. This is early confirmations. These are the questions that you answer before layout lock. Because they're unanswered, they will force redesign later. Number one, are your program and licensure assumptions verified? Not, we think so, verified. Number two is your permitting jurisdiction pathway direction aligned, so you're not surprised later by a classification or an approach shift that changes layout. Number three, do you understand your egress and compartment safety direction, at least conceptually, so you don't replan later? Number four, have you identified security versus egress conflicts early? Because controlled access and required egress often collide in long-term care, especially when we're dealing with memory care and behavioral health conflicts. Is the infection control strategy defined? Clean and dirty handling, your soiled strategy, your isolation considerations, if they're relevant. And in renovation, we're talking about containment and routing. Number six, do you have meds and support spaces strategy? Central versus decentralized, secure storage needs, and staffing workflow implications. Number seven, if it's an occupied renovation, are phasing constraints defined? Temporary routes or swing space, the continuity of services, and what can't be disrupted? And number eight, have you flagged special safety and observation needs, sightlines, elopement risks, fall risks, or escalation response needs? Here's the rule. If any open item changes layout drivers, you don't lock the layout direction. So next we're going to talk about the watch list. If you keep one slide from today, keep this one. These are the most common rework triggers we see in long-term care. One is corridor and egress strategy shifts late. You find out that the corridor needs to be wider, or there was some assumptions made in egress strategy. Two, compartment or fire or smoke boundary concepts move late. So we find out that we don't have enough room for area of refuge or some other control mechanism that we need, and so we have to move that smoke barrier. Door hardware and security decisions conflict with egress and gets corrected late. Number four is that support spaces are sized or located wrong. Meds, clean supplies, soiled holding areas, and the building starts to fight the workflow. Number five is observation and sightline needs are discovered late, and the plan has to be reworked. So nobody thought about where staff is going to be and what they need to see from that location. Number six is infection control. This is where we're talking about separation and renovation containment are not designed earlier, which causes schedule and operational harm. Seven is peak congestion isn't tested. So we're talking med pass, meals, administration stacks, or admissions stack. And circulation fails under that load. 8 is the program adds happen late. So therapy or treatment elements that weren't defined and they ripple into MEP and layout. Some ones that I can think of are we change the people that we're actually going to help and how we're actually going to license this facility without developing a brand new program and giving that to your designer and accepting that when you do this, you're inviting a full redesign for all of those operational needs. Number 9 is utility and MEP capacity. Surprises show up late because the loads weren't anticipated. We often see things like we added an elevator or positive pressure in the hallways. We need negative pressure rooms. And 10, in renovations specifically, temporary routes and phasing were not designed early. So where the project stalls or becomes unsafe to operate through. This watch list is not about fear, it's about predictability. You're simply choosing to see predictable problems early. We're trying to pull that risk that you experience late in the project further up so that you can manage it and control it. Now let's apply this to an occupied renovation scenario. In occupied work, compliance is not just what is built at the end, it's also how you protect people during construction, and we all know this, but temporary egress routes matter. Infection control, containment matters. Resident movement and staff workflow matter. Service continuity matters because you can't just shut down critical functions for weeks. If temporary routes and containments aren't designed early, you don't just lose schedule, you create operational risks, and you force redesign midstream. Now let's look at a safety-driven scenario. Memory care or behavioral health risk. These environments have tension pairs that must be resolved early. Controlled access versus required egress. Observation versus privacy. Special risk measures that affect hardware, sightlines, and staff responses. De-escalation flow and staff support zones that need to be positioned intentionally. These are not detailed decisions, they're layout drivers. If you leave them vague, the plan will change later, usually after time and money have already been invested. So here's how to operationalize this tool. Run a 60-minute regulatory map meeting early, before schematic direction gets locked. Attendees should include the administrator or operator decision maker, the director of nursing or the clinical leader who understands practice risk, facilities who understand constraints and maintenance, and the architect. And depending on the project, it can also help to include your general contractor or construction manager because phasing and constructability often determine what's realistic. The outputs are simple. We want confirmed assumptions, open questions assigned to the right party, and the rework trigger watch list, so you can manage risk intentionally. And again, the rule is cleared. If unanswered items affect layout drivers, you can explore concepts, but you don't lock a layout direction yet. So let's recap. First, we want to separate the 3 layers: licensure, building and life safety systems, and survey expectations. Second, we want to confirm the few decisions that actually drive layout early so you're not redesigning them later. And third, keep a watch list of rework triggers and treat them like project risks, not surprises. This is how you protect schedule, budget, and operational outcomes. In our next video, we'll lock the minimum viable clinical program, the specific decisions you must make before the layout approval so you don't get late clinical reversals. If you want a 1-page regulatory map from today, use the link below, and we'll see you in Long-Term Care 03.